Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a conversation between Ruth Rondon and myself. I am Samantha Graber, the Advocacy Programs Manager for the Anti-Human Trafficking Initiative. This is one of our first stabs at this, so we're going to just get right into a conversation and let you view in on that. At the end, you'll be able to pose any questions. You can reach out to me. All the contact information will be below in this description. Thanks for tuning in. And I wanted to introduce you to this wonderful woman I met through LinkedIn, which is a great way to connect with people, not only on business issues, but on really important human rights kinds of issues. Because Ruth Rondon, after falling prey to traffickers as a teenager, she broke free from 18 years of drug addiction and trafficking at the age of 33. She secretly endured abuse and ongoing trauma as a child, and as an adult, she was always living really just beyond the reach of anyone who cared for her, including her family. Now, for years, Ruth navigated through life in survival mode, lonely and oblivious to her own potential and power. But after finally breaking free from drug addiction and trafficking, she went to work as a clerk for 27 years. Now, retirement has enabled her to really begin helping victims to become victors like herself, and to teach advocates how to walk alongside of them. So Ruth's passion is to inspire a generation to become part of the solution in winning the war on slavery. Ruth credits a 6-month jail stint for drug possession. That was in 1988, and that enabled her to become drug-free. So she was able to escape the dangers of trafficking because her family took her back in this time. Ruth realizes she's very fortunate because not many victims have a safe place to go like she did. So following her release from jail, she had started some counseling, and she was insistent on following the 12-step program from Narcotics Anonymous. But for a long time, in all honesty, she still felt like there was something missing until she discovered the ACE training at age 58. Ruth says that the ACE study is truly the science of hope, and I have to agree. The more I study that, the more I dive into some of these programs, I am 100% on board with that. Now, this is a really cool part. Ruth was governor appointed to serve on the Michigan Human Trafficking Health Advisory Board. That happened in 2015, and she's still serving. I got to tell you, this is the only one in the country, and I think that Michigan is really onto something here. Now, she wrote in her memoir and publicly tells her story to hopefully prevent trafficking and abuse from happening to others. She co-authored a really unique online human trafficking program, and she did that with her ex-counselor's daughter, Pat Hathaway. And it's called The War on Slavery, and that's WAR, and those stand for what, Ruth? WAR?
Warmth, assess, and release the shame.
Yes, love it. All right, in 2018, now this is a really integral part of Ruth's story, and we'll get into this a little bit. In 2018, the courts finally acknowledged Ruth's victimization and officially expunged her prostitution charges from her record. That is what holds so many victors back, and it just follows them forever. And this is something that we'll dive into and the effect of that. So 2018, many years later, and that just really helps just release in so many different ways. Now, Ruth credits her hard work for the many ways that her life has come full circle. And you can learn all about her, and I'll have links to her Facebook page and her websites in the description below. So I want to welcome you, Ruth, and I'm so thankful that we get to do our first Zoom conversation together.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Graber.
Oh, yes, my pleasure. All right, so I posed a couple questions to you ahead of time because I'm one of those people that I kind of like to be prepared, and I got the same impression from when we had our first conversation off the air, so to speak. And so what I was starting to ask here, and I'd like to start out with is, yeah, we see a lot of activity and a lot of public information, these public campaigns talking about human trafficking. And then, of course, we see the pictures of the shackles and the stuff, you know, these stereotypical pictures. But you and I both know that it's not typically like that. Trafficking can be happening in plain sight. So I had asked you, you know, with all this public awareness going on, why don't we see more arrests in our local communities? And you had a really great insight into that. So you were sharing more that, you know, we see these huge busts but we're not necessarily going to see that on the local level. And what do you attribute that to?
I think there's still a misbelief
Mm-hmm.
that victims can be forced or coerced into this kind of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
We're living in a strong shaming culture. It's what we've been doing for years.
Yes,
and I think it's just so ingrained in us. But you also have to remember that law enforcement does have a hard time trying to decipher who the victims are and who the victims are not.
Yes.
Hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
People do desperate things.
Mm-hmm.
When you end up in the street, you're in survival mode.
Yes.
And you might have to shoplift just to feed yourself.
Absolutely.
So they find you guilty. They don't see you as a victim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I
do
get
have
that.
some criminal charges on my record still that were never expunged. My prostitution charges were expunged.
Mm-hmm.
And I am guilty of those shoplifting. And I am guilty of writing those bad checks.
Sure.
But where did I get the bad checks? They should have asked me that.
Yes.
The trafficker supplied them to me and told me to go in the bank with them and waited in the parking lot. They should have asked me, how did you get here? Who are you with?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with the shoplifting.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the parking lot waiting for me to come out with some clothes that we could return for cash without a receipt.
Yeah.
Because I was white and I was innocent looking and I could do it much better than his other girls could do it.
Okay.
So they should have asked me,
Mm-hmm.
where are you going with these clothes?
Yeah.
How did you get here? Where's your car? I mean, I was so victimized. I was being used. It was a racket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a scheme. It was a crime scheme that I was involved in, and it wasn't my choice.
Yeah.
I was living on the street, couldn't go back home, had a criminal record.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time I was 17 years old, I was drug addicted.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, and that feeds in, as you and I know, that feeds in to cover that shame and just survive through the moments, cover the pain. And that, and then there's the further victimization and shame from society that says, oh, well, she's just a drug addict.
That's right.
And that just feeds and piles it on. So here you are, this young woman trying to figure out how to just survive, and the rest of the community looks at you and paints you in a certain way.
Yeah.
Which then there comes that shift, and we know from mental health that there comes that shift of, if that's the way I'm seen, that's just what I am.
Yes, you become what you're called.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was called a whore ever since I was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I believed it.
Right. And that's what it boils back down to. And that's where this ACEs studies is. And if no one's heard that, I will have links down below in the show notes as well. And that is we actually just had the doctor who discovered this or started working on this project 30, 40 years ago. We just had him come to our local community. We are working, it was incredible.
Who was
he's I'm sorry?
What was his name?
I'm trying to remember. It's a I'll have it in the show notes. It was the original doctor who.
Dr. Vincent Felitti.
That's it. Yes, I knew it was Italian.
I'm in communication with Dr. Felitti. I'm so excited he's supporting my work. I'm trying to co-author an article for his Kaiser Permanente Medical Journal.
That would be fantastic.
He
was really brilliant. He's so compassionate. He's very dry. Yeah, because he's a researcher.
Yeah, yeah.
His heart, amazing already.
Yeah, amazing man. I know.
Oh, and for him to just buck the system, he was such an advocate for. Yeah. Not only for the work that he's doing, but he's like, you know what, folks, we're going about this the wrong way. We are not realizing. Yes.
Persevered with that belief. So many people were coming at him with different angles of how to look at this, and he persevered. He stood on solid ground and he spoke his truth.
Yeah,
like him.
Yeah. Yes, and it's really great. And his work is just as important, if not more important today, as you're really pointing out. It comes down to being a trauma-informed community, and that goes across the board: healthcare system, law enforcement, other human beings in the community. If you see somebody at the grocery store, you see you're in the car next to where Ruth was with her traffickers, and you look in there, we're always looking around. You see something odd, do something about it.
If you see something. Yep.
Yeah, speak up for that child, that person. I don't care what age they are. They could be 50, 60-year-old, and you're looking and you're seeing something just doesn't right. Hit that whole mind your own business bullshit, because we can't do that in these situations. That could be
It can be hard to know what to say, though. It can be hard to know what to do, because, the parents can retaliate against you if you stand up for the child.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful app that you can get from Stewards of Children. It's a free app.
Ooh, okay.
I learned so much from that app. You have how to be a responsible bystander there.
Oh.
They say that what you do is you go in, you name the problem, you name the abuse, and then you wrap it up and make it very short and just leave. So we'll know that you just witnessed abuse.
Okay, that's fascinating. So in that, and I'll put this all in the show notes as well. Thank you. So anything that comes to mind as we're chatting, and then we'll convene afterwards as well. But we want to be a resource for people. That's awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So it's I think by being trauma informed, and you hit it earlier, where it's not what are you doing or why did you do that, it becomes what's happening to you, or what happened to you, because every single person that I've ever spoken with, and I know you've probably spoken with many as well, there's a story there in childhood. There's something that occurred, some event, and it can be a whole laundry list of things, but it changed the way that child views the world and themselves in it. And then that's either fed over time or that's healed over time. And the majority of the time it's fed, and that becomes then this identity that somebody holds forever, and it's based on something they had no control over when they were a child. And I think that's the most beautiful part of the ACEs study, and now that people are being more informed, and we're starting to see it, but the whole system is set up against it, basically. The system is set up against the human being, which is beyond fathomable to me. When you're right, when you're at your lowest point and you are just so in need of that human connection, and you're a checklist, or you're arrested for some infarction, and then that becomes now your identity. You go down this road through there, and no one really says, why is she doing this?
I know.
Why? That's the most important question. And I come from a holistic health background. So my goal was always to go back to the foundation of the cellular level. What's going on in this body? Why is it so inflamed? Why is it showing me this particular sign and symptom? What's the cause? And that's the same thing here. Here we are. What's the cause of this behavior? We're seeing 7-year-olds being arrested for acting out against their teachers. And it's like, why is no one asking what's going on in that 7-year-old's life that they would do this? That's not natural behavior, So I think that's why these conversations are so important. And that's why I wanted to not only record us just with our voice, but with our faces, so people can identify more, like, all right, this is Sam and Ruth talking, and there's something about just making this more human. So I love that you're willing to do that. You've been such a great advocate. So kind of getting back into that, why we don't see maybe more arrests and more prosecutions for human trafficking, you had pointed out that sometimes people are just arrested or prosecuted for different things. So can you explain a little more of like what you've seen and maybe what you mean by that?
Right now, law enforcement depends on the victims coming forward.
Okay.
And that doesn't happen. I mean, if you use the trauma-informed care approach, they're more likely to come forward, but it's still going to take time to gain their trust.
Yes.
And to wrap up a case, they don't have that kind of time. I was thinking about that because the ACE study proves that trauma escapes language and causes memory loss. I look back when I was left for dead in an apple orchard when I was 28 years old. The prosecutor refused to prosecute. The kind detective that was on the case told me that the prosecutor didn't think we had enough evidence. So he was forced to drop the investigation, but he wanted to get those guys for me. He said, Ruth, I know you didn't ask for this life, and we're going to get it. I know he tried for me.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank him. For years, I wanted to thank him. But, when I look back, I wasn't a good witness. But if they knew the trauma that trauma escapes language and causes memory loss, they wouldn't depend so much on the victim's story or testimony.
Right.
They should have asked the predator what they were doing that night. Where did they go? Did you have Ruth in your car? They should have did more of that. Why did Ruth run through an apple orchard naked at 2:00 in the morning and end up on somebody's front doorstep? When you were with, they should.
Yeah.
So depending on the victim's story, I really think they need to get away from that a little bit, because it takes time for them to get the words.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. I mean, I know there are pockets in my past that I think, I really don't remember years. That happens to everybody.
Well, even immediately after the trauma, you have images in your head of what happened, and it's the most frustrating thing that you can't get those images out into words.
I can imagine. And if you've got a child who has been victimized since being a child and has never really even developed fully the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's something.
I remember one of the most healing moments in therapy for me was when my therapist handed me a list of emotions. I wanted to express to her how the story was so matter of fact, and it wasn't even really solid, accurate facts. Then she handed me a list of emotions. So if she wanted me to go inside and decipher how I was feeling at that time. I had a world of words here to express myself. That was huge. Finally, get my story out, because when you can express yourself more accurately, that's when people can validate your feelings. If you can't express them, nobody can validate them.
That's a really
learning those words. Yeah, just learning those words made me want to learn more words, and that's why I ended up becoming a writer.
Yeah. Oh, and you're an amazing writer, and the way you share your story is just awesome. And you'll be able to see her videos. I'll have some posted below, but also just everything that Ruth has done, and you can see the evolution as somebody starts to take back their power and their identity and recreate their identity. Because when trauma happens so early, you don't have a chance to grow into who you are, and it's just fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating to watch people just. You know that whole the idea of the phoenix rising from the ashes. I mean, that's just it's how I see it. It's beautiful. So we've
if you can go back,
please.
If you can go back to your own adverse childhood experiences and answer your questions about your adulthood. It can answer your questions about why people reacted the way they did, why you reacted the way you did.
Bingo, that's one.
About my own parents' adverse childhood experiences.
Yes, yeah.
And my question today is, what did people expect?
Absolutely. And you nailed it right from the get-go. We are living in a shame overwrought society, but the crazy thing here, and I don't mean crazy from like pathological crazy, but like the ironically crazy thing is we all want connection. That is the one thing that human beings crave. We need it. It is literally, without it, we perish. I mean, they show that in orphanages in other countries where kids so we have to have that connection. And even if that connection or that family is dysfunctional in someone else's mind, it's all we got. It's all we know. And hurt people, like you mentioned there. And that not only goes for a trafficker or an abuser or a rapist or whatever we're talking about in that specific situation, it goes for families. And if a mother has been traumatized when she was a child and has children, and then that gets paid forward, and that's where I can honestly say that most healthy, well-meaning people, they are literally doing the best they can.
I know. That's why I was so able to forgive my parents.
Yes, yeah. And we have to forgive others, and we have to forgive ourselves. Ooh, that's the hardest.
That is the hardest. Yeah. But, it was easier for me to forgive myself when I realized that, my parents and my grandparents didn't have the resources in their lifetime like I had in mine. Didn't even have, there was no such thing as a rape crisis center.
Okay.
For domestic violence.
Absolutely not.
Women didn't even have rights to divorce.
Very true.
I was in World War II and a raging alcoholic. Nobody knew how to treat post-traumatic stress disorder back then. It was called shell shock.
Okay.
So now I've got a battered mother and an alcoholic father trying to raise 6 kids.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
What does anybody expect, again?
Yes, absolutely. And that's where, that can take us down the road of, literally we could talk for hours, I know you and I, because we could go down the path of that is, here we've got families and they're trying to do their best. They're facing all the hardships of the world. We watch it everywhere. We see all this negativity, feeds and feeds that negativity, which then feeds more of our shame of why we're not doing better, why we're not at some other
Right. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, what's wrong with me? But I think the more, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal type of counseling. It can just be reading some other people's stories and being able to identify with them and realizing I'm not alone in this. So that starts to take that shame away of, okay, I'm not the only one that fell victim, quote unquote, to this kind of situation. I'm not the only one that's had this situation happen. I didn't see it coming. It starts to help us understand that we're not at fault. You're not at fault for what you did and how you got into that situation. That, like you say, what did they expect? Now that we're more informed, though, I think as a society and as a community, we need to be reaching out to people to help them on that healing path.
Right.
No one can heal for you. You do the work. But if someone can hold your hand and walk aside, alongside you, like you talk about, that's the greatest gift anyone can give.
That's the greatest gift.
It's just, you don't have to fix anybody.
It's difficult for people to hear the horrific stories of human trafficking victims. Yeah. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I never, since I escaped the dangers of trafficking, I worked for the government for 23 years, but worked as a clerk for 27 years. All during that time, I was not able to listen to those horrific stories.
Sure.
I was asked to join a trauma support group.
Okay.
I could not listen to their stories. I was so triggered by it. I could not do it.
Mm-hmm.
Since I discovered the ACE study and I started doing my own research, now I can say I can hold somebody else's story.
Oh, that's really powerful.
Now I can sit with them. Now I can be with them.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe whoever is going to be doing victim services, advocacy, they have to be able to come to terms with their own stuff before they're going to be able to sit comfortably with somebody else's story. I
can absolutely resonate with that. I think that's a really profound insight. And then that takes me to where law enforcement, I think a lot of folks who are in that field, especially on the front lines, they're so traumatized. And that can lead to desensitization. And then we think
that's
they're hurt.
That's why we need teamwork.
Yes.
Without teamwork, we will continue to fail victims and each other.
Yes. Yeah.
Can't be in this work. A nurse and a doctor, healthcare, law enforcement, soldiers can't be in this work without support.
Yes, I agree. And then that leads to what we've talked about with the task force. That's my passion right now is I want to unify our local task force so that we do have a team to help the men and women who need us, because we are, please.
We spend a lot of time training our soldiers for war, a lot of time. Mm-hmm. To get back from war, it's 15 minutes of debriefing.
Oh, yeah.
I think that anybody that is going to run to danger, like they do in the the emergency department, like they do it, they're going to run to danger. I think they should be debriefed after every one.
Mm. Okay.
I think somebody should be able to sit with them,
mm-hmm.
then process it.
Mm-hmm. What would that look like? Like, what would describe what that kind of situation would be? Because I have a vision of it because I've been through some of those. But what would it look like?
Well, I mean, I see these nurses, these healthcare, taking care of patient after patient, trauma after trauma, and hearing their stories and watching their wounds and their trauma.
Mm-hmm.
They get the secondary trauma, the secondhand trauma.
Yes, yes.
So who's going to hold them up? When they can sit down in a chair and say they did their job, who is going to be with them? Right. Are you just going to say, go home and deal with it now?
Yeah. Well, and that's why you see drug abuse and alcohol abuse and spousal abuse. You see all sorts of abuse in these fields. And these aren't monsters. These are the people literally, like you say, running to others. They're running to help people they don't even know. And they're running to help a bad guy or a good guy they don't know at the moment.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And if it was more of a caring environment for them as well, instead it becomes, and because I've got many friends in law enforcement and many friends who've been soldiers for their entire life and they're retired, and they develop this sense of humor, that dark sense of humor, to cover the wounds, and it just becomes more of a layer and layer and layer, or they don't see their family.
It snowballs.
Yes, yeah, it really does. So I think it's another thing to talk about at some point, and I'll bring up with some of the leaders in law enforcement of, can we look at something like that? Like have a chaplain on staff. We had a debriefing after a really traumatic thing here with a young girl a few years ago, and that was awesome because it let us all like, oh, okay, you're feeling that too? Okay, good. Like we're still human, and I say good because I want to make sure I stay a human. I don't want to get hard. I'm like, I want to get angry. I want to get upset. That's good. That's a good thing.
What I've learned from my research and learning from all those great teachers is that we can be resilient in the face of trauma only if we have the buffer of healthy relationships.
Yes, I get that. Yeah. And that's the critical moment there. That could be a relationship with your family if you're so blessed to have that, or with friends, or it could be someone who's a complete stranger that then becomes your ally. And that's where any of us could be that person.
Even the healthy relationships at work. If you're in the emergency department, if there's still somebody at work, that you go to after every trauma, you can be resilient to get up and do it again. But if it goes unaddressed, unaddressed ongoing trauma is what snowballs.
Yeah, I could see that, and that leads to burnout of good people, because we see that all the time. And imagine being in the DCF, the Child and Family Services, or some of these investigators, and I can imagine the burnout. And
a lot of people don't realize what our troopers go through. I read a book by Robert Molidor. He's a Michigan State trooper.
Okay.
Retired. And he talked about his experiences. Reading books from retired professionals like that, you can really learn.
I bet.
And I also read a book from a Vietnam Marine. My two brothers were in Vietnam, so that's why I read this book. His name is John Nash. He wrote the book called Whispers of Death, The Nightmare That Lasts a Lifetime.
Oof. Yeah.
To understand my brothers a lot more. They went through, because you know what? They're not going to go into detail like that of what they went through. So reading books like this can help you understand what these wonderful people go through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it just boils down to just opening the human heart in yourself to welcome others and allow them to live in their hurt. That's another part is it's a campaign right now pretty much, but the PTSD and how soldiers, it's those wounds that aren't visible, and that goes for everything. And I think we also need to be really respectful of somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder, because we minimize it now. We say, okay, I didn't get it. I don't say I have PTSD from that. That really ticks me off. I've had a little talking to with a few people, like, don't minimize the reality of that for some people. That's not right. That they don't deserve that. You need to allow people to feel their emotions. And if somebody uses,
you can't expect somebody to just get over it.
No.
Really doing. You're saying get over it.
Right.
Fix yourself better.
Basically, like, I don't want you to get your stuff on me because I can't handle it, so you shouldn't be able to allow me to do it. And that's just, if you've been doing that, to our audience, if you've been doing that, it's time to just stop. Forgive yourself for it. You realize how much that kind of spills over to others. But just allow yourself to sit with someone. If someone has chosen you as their person to share their story, just sit there with them. It's okay to just not talk. You don't have to solve anything. And I know, some of us, we have this fix-it mentality, and I've been guilty where I want to offer advice or, well, did you ever, or what did you think? Now I have learned with all the trauma-informed therapy I've gone through and what I've been learning, I've learned to just be able to sit with somebody. And it's okay to feel emotions too. But if they're telling you, if they're sharing with you, let them do that, because that is so therapeutic. And just to be heard, you don't.
And if they're sharing with you, if they are sharing with you, gain their trust somewhat. So it's really an honor if they open up.
Yes, it really, really, truly is. And that's where we, with not being in such a microwave society and running from thing to thing, it's just nice to be able to take a moment. Like I've had, I do coffee dates with people, and they'll say, oh, we should get together. And I go, oh, okay, great. Get your calendar out. Let's make it happen. And they're like, huh? Because it's kind of like a surface thing of, oh, we should catch up. Yes, let's do that. Let's schedule it right now, because you don't know when you're going to have another opportunity. And I can tell you,
that's so true.
Right? Like how many times years have gone by and I'm like, this is ridiculous. We see each other 2 or 3 times a year. We live in literally the same neighborhood. That cannot be. And we like each other's company. I mean, this is crazy. Like
Dr. Graber, that's why I'm a writer. Everything I write will outlast me. Everything that I ever wanted to say in my lifetime but wasn't able to is going to outlast me.
I agree. And isn't that the coolest? That's why I love to write too. And I'll tell you, writing for me is therapy. It is so therapeutic. I love it. I love being able to express how I feel or share something or just process something.
Yeah.
It's been huge. Yeah.
It's a way to get it out.
Yes.
Because whatever you have on your mind, you don't have somebody to listen to you all the time.
All the time, right.
You get it out by just writing it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember when the last chapter of my book was written? I still get teary-eyed thinking about it. I was at the computer right here, and my cat was sitting right there. The last chapter of my book was written. And every time I wrote something in my book, I was writing the trauma. I was getting the trauma outside of it.
Yeah.
I had these breakdowns in front of my computer. Well, the very last one, I was able to step back and take a look at that book. It was my life. I had a burst of gratefulness that I had survived all that. I was able to look at it from the outside looking in and realized I survived it. That was the first time I was able to embrace my survival.
Wow.
I was in this deep, dark hole with the trauma, and then I looked at my cat, and she was sleeping. I looked around my home, and I looked at all the comforts of my home, and I knew it was over. I embraced my survival, and I was so thankful that I'm alive,
I bet.
That's why I continue to write. It's such a good out. You have to get it outside of you, or it will play at you.
You're amazing. All right. Well, this is natural,
Yes, I know.
And I think, the more you as people, all of us here, the more that we realize these are beautiful people behind these stories, behind these arrests, behind the trauma is a hurt child. And I learned in some of my therapy, like, it's going back to heal that child.
It is.
That's what has to happen. It's not about us looking at ourselves like I think I was 27 the first time I went to therapy. It was like, I thought, I'm here, I'm a 27-year-old, I'm educated, I got all this stuff going for me. Why am I feeling this way? And then, we tied it back to child stuff. And I was like, wow, how can that follow you forever? But it does. And then when it does. And if we don't address that, and you don't have to go back, you don't have to forgive people for what they did to you. You don't have to make it okay, but you have to forgive yourself, or you have to, and for lost time. I met with a woman in one of my group sessions. She was 80 years old, and she finally realized that she had wasted, in her mind, she had wasted her lifetime fighting for her 5-year-old self. And it was at that moment that I was like, I am not going to be 80 and still running the same racket. I refuse. So it just, her story really helped propel me to work on my stuff. And it still comes up all the time.
Sure.
I'm like, whoa.
Sure.
So, do you
from it every day.
Yeah.
I remember one time somebody told me, You may not have had the best mother or the best father, but you can parent yourself now.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? It's so weird. And I get it now.
I do.
Now I get it.
Yeah. Yes. And these are things, and when we share stuff like that, it helps others because they think, well, Ruth has it all together, or see, she has it all together. And I laugh sometimes when people say that to me. I'm like, oh, if they only knew.
If they only knew. I know what I think.
Fold another one.
In my book, I decided to write a letter to my 11-year-old self, because that's when I was.
Love that.
I was first raped at age 10, and then I was raped again at age 11.
Yeah.
And then again raped at 13. So I wrote myself a letter, Dear Young Ruth. And I told her everything that she was missing, that she needed to hear.
Yeah.
And I signed it, Someone Who Cares.
That's sweet. Yeah. And it's a very healthful.
Very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what you were missing and
Yeah.
put it down and give it to yourself.
Yeah. I love that. And hopefully that will help someone realize maybe in themselves and their healing journey that could be very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's it. And I think it's also just understanding, and I try to see the child in other people. So when someone, reacts to me in a certain way, before I was more compassionate and more, just more experiencing the idea that, yeah, we're all walking wounded. But if before that, I would react to somebody, and you hear someone say, well, they made me angry, and now I can realize, no, not necessarily. They may have done something, but you chose anger as a response. There's a reaction, and there's a reflex. Sure, you can have an immediate like, whoo, that got my little burr under my saddle. That's fine. But if you continue in that emotion, that's more on us. That's by choice. So us working on things ourselves, we can show up in the world as a little more healed, and that gives other people a safer space to basically express their own emotions. And I love being able to do that now. I look at it like, we're all just our inner children playing together, and that's been really liberating for me, instead of feeling like I had to have everything all perfect and this, everything organized in this little facade and show the world this perfect exterior, this, whatever it may be. And of course that's completely unattainable. But that perfectionism, that stopped me from a lot of things over my life. But now I realize, like, even just doing this Zoom interview or, chat that we're having, there is no such thing as perfection, but it's exactly perfectly what it needs to be. We're having our music on, we're crying on camera, and all these things that, but it is exactly what it needs to be. And that's the same in our daily life, and same with our relationships. There is no perfect, there's no, none of this stuff that we construct out of thin air. I mean, we all buy into it, but no one ever sat there and said to you, you shall be perfect, you shall do this, you shall do that. But we all bought into it collectively. So the cool part about that is we can all say, nah, no more, I'm done. I don't buy it anymore.
We can all do that. Yeah. You know, when I look back at my life and I think of when I escaped trafficking and before I discovered the ACE study, I was still living in hiding. I still had this terrible secret, It took a long time for me to get to where I'm at today. Mm-hmm. I really don't think it's going to take that long for the next generation, because we've got the ACE study now. Now we've got questions. We've got age-appropriate ways to prevent. Mm-hmm. We've also got age-appropriate ways to intervene. Mm. Yeah. So I have so much more hope for the next generation, that it won't take this long anymore.
I do too. Have you heard of Miss Kendra? It's a school program, and it's basically, there's a fictitious character named Miss Kendra, and she is she's that place where kids can say what's going on. So they'll write letters to Miss Kendra, like, Miss Kendra.
I did hear of that. I did hear of that.
I learned of this at the same seminar where Dr. Filletti.
Okay. Filletti. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Filletti, where he was. So that's a whole thing that I'm looking into. Our county here, Escambia County in Florida, is considering adopting this program, and I am in love with it. I think, wow, what a way to give kids a voice. And maybe, like, you just nailed it, where it's like, instead of trying to help people recover from trafficking, if we can get to the point where that is a thing of the past, wow.
Exactly.
Ugh.
That's how I feel. We can get a handle on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And
because, you know, one of the big challenges we have is that Hollywood mentality where it's glorified. You know, that's what scares me. Because I see the adolescents in my family getting on these games, doing the videos, revealing, you know, it's all glorified.
It is.
They are all groomed to be that way because of the Hollywood mentality is so scary.
Yes. Yeah, I've made a contact with somebody who is, he's a former pimp. So he is, and he's fascinating to me. I listened to one of his podcasts or I listened to his podcast and a lot of the different situations that he talks about with himself and how when he was growing up, it was the pimp culture. And it's basically expected in his neighborhood, his area of San Diego. That's just what you do.
He was brought up in Pimp City. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Does anybody expect? I know. There we have it.
Exactly. And so now he's out trying to help intervene for the next generation of there are so many other options there for a young woman. And he's a fascinating person. And I'm really excited that he'll be on one of these Zooms as well, because his story is a really critical part. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about the trafficked victim, and to use that term, or the trafficker, but we don't talk about what brought the trafficker to that point, what brought the pimp to that point in the story. I would say it's 100% the same childhood traumas that brought that young woman to that situation. And then the whole other flip side of, you know, we know this is an economic equation here. So what about the person who's buying, the demand? Yeah, we've got to dig deeper into that person. And then that brings us to their own hot childhood traumas, the shame that they have from that festers and builds inside. And then that ends up being released in action. And then that becomes something even worse. And then we've got the pornification of America. I mean, that goes hand in hand with trafficking. And I know, that's a whole other can of worms there. But that's becoming so much more acceptable. And, you know, well, everybody watches it. I mean, it's, you know, it's sexy and all these things. And it's like, oh, if you all knew what's going on behind that camera, in most cases, you would never view that again. There is nothing sexy about it. So that, you know, that feeds into it too, the connection, the, you know, just everything. And I think it just is going to take more and more voices stepping up and speaking out and saying, you know, that doesn't have to go this route. And I think the more healed that we as individuals become, the more healed society will be. And then we can heal and maybe prevent a couple generations from now, because I think it's still going to be spillover for quite some time. But it has to start at some point, and why not now?
Right.
Well, we can't go back and do anything about the past.
But you know, that healing process, I wrote an article called Understanding the 4 Stages of Recovering from Sex Trafficking.
Yes, and I need to put that in the link. Yes. Please.
When I wrote that article, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned, because what happened with me in the process was I came to understand myself so much better by, you know, understanding my adverse childhood experiences and also understanding my parents. But I also had to come to understand how I passed my own shame on and how I failed so many as an adult and as a hardcore drug addict. I mean, I was a hardcore drug addict. I don't want anybody to think that I was a victim 100% of the time. I was not a victim 100% of the time. I became a hurt person who hurt people, and I was a desperate person who did desperate things. But I can definitely say that I was victimized way before I even met my trafficker, and just continued, it snowballed. But yeah, I wasn't a victim 100% of the time. We have to own up to that.
Absolutely.
We can understand how we hurt other people. We have to try to at least make amends. And, you know, it's been so many years. If I could make amends to to my mother. I tried so hard to make amends to my mother and to my family. And I think I did that part. I was so thankful I had the opportunity to do that. I think I became my mother's mother when she was in the nursing home.
Yeah. Yeah.
We became the best of friends before she died. So I'm still trying to do everything I can to not be on my deathbed with a lot of regrets. You know what I mean? We can at least pay it forward.
Mm-hmm. I hear that. That's a really great way to look at it. And yeah, I mean, it does become about what you want to leave as your legacy. We're not just here to.
Most people, even like Armand King, I think even he is in this work as a way to make amends.
That's my person. That's the former.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We get in this work as a way to pay it forward, as a way to make amends.
Yeah.
I do this work for life.
Yeah.
There's been some people that reached out to me after they heard me speak, and they said, "You just told my story." At that point, I have to practice what I preach, right? I can't say, "Okay, well, I'm busy."
Yeah.
No, I'm walking alongside them now.
Mm-hmm. And that's a strong point to make, is once you do start speaking out and you start helping people and you start opening these conversations, you then have a responsibility in a way of meeting people where they're at. You're not responsible for, but you have a responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a big distinction.
But you also have to remember, you can't walk on water. I remember one time Dr. Phil said, just because you had brain surgery doesn't mean you can now perform it.
Thank you, Dr. Phil.
There's still so much I have to learn,
Yeah.
but I'm still going to do what I can and give what I can and try to still keep a balance, because if I get burned out, I won't be able to continue either.
Ooh, and that's really huge. That's really huge. And it's still taking care of yourself. And even once you've had this insight to healing, that healing continues every day, because
It does.
it's going to be exposed, like you mentioned earlier, to other triggers. And there could be something that you just had no clue it was going to come up and well up emotions in you that day. But that's all right. That's all right. These things, they get hidden in all these little pockets in our brain and in our cells in our body. Now, I'm a retired chiropractor, and I remember working on people, and they would just start crying, or they would start shaking, or there would some emotional release that would come. First time it freaked me out. Like, I thought I hurt them. And then I realized they were just processing emotions. Those emotions had been stored in their body. So I always recommend when people are going through emotional and psychological healing, please do some body work, whether it's
do some body work too.
Whether it's having someone work on you, if that's okay, or getting out and exercising, or doing sauna work, something to get that chemistry out. Every time you have a thought, chemicals are moving all around and they get stored in the body. So being able to release that. I've done a lot of weight loss work. People think it's just about the weight. I always go in and touch on trauma. I always go in and talk about emotions. Many times we're putting on excess weight to protect ourselves, cushion ourselves from more hurt. And it's not something we on purpose do. We don't go, oh, I'm going to put on weight so I can
right.
Day, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. It just becomes this thing. So everything is so interconnected.
It is. It is. I joined a trauma yoga group.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And have these trauma massages at the agency where I get my therapy and my counseling from. They offer that.
Oh, I love that. I don't think
I have to do a lot more body work, but I got my first trauma-informed doctor who's got a 10-week program. He's got a multidisciplinary team. He's got a psychologist, a medical doctor, a physical therapist, occupational therapy. Wow. It's a big program.
Yeah.
And I'm Dr. Felitti for even getting this kind of thing started.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that the ball is rolling, but it's up to us to keep running with it.
Right. Dr. Graber, I was in so many drug rehabs, outpatient, inpatient, residential, and I was preyed upon in every one of them. Every one of them. I know it's still going on. Nobody can tell me that every one of these safe houses is safe.
I heard the same.
I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason I was able to escape trafficking is because I finally sued the last rehab I was in.
Okay.
He withheld, my counselor withheld my methadone from me until I submitted to his sexual demands. We had sex sessions instead of counseling sessions. I couldn't get my methadone without it. There was a really nice man walking around that clinic. And when I found out that he was the director, what was going on?
Okay.
I ended up passing a lie detector test.
Okay.
We ended up settling out of court for only $10,000. My lawyer got a third of that. But it was enough money for me to start anew. I got that money when I walked out of jail this last time, and my family took me back. So that money did help me escape trafficking. But every rehab I went to, it was the same thing. I know it's still going on.
And that, yeah, I've heard that story from more than one person. You know, when we have these kind of predators in our churches, they're in our Boys and Girl Scouts, they're in our classrooms, they're in the places where folks are trying to turn their lives around.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable. And
It
that's
is.
where the rest of us out here have to start calling people, and excuse my French, but on their shit. Because I have hit a point in my life where I don't sit back and watch anything. You know,
we have to have regulations. We have to have the oversight. If nobody's accountable to anybody, it's going to continue.
Correct.
The thing that I think is missing in a lot of the trainings, the healthcare training, is the documentation or the monitoring of the one-on-ones.
Yes, you touched on that before. Yeah, go into that a little bit more. Yes.
Well, when I was, here's a really good example of why. When I was 13 years old, I was in a mental institution for 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
The very first time, and I had already been raped and gang raped before I went to this mental institution. The very first time I was brought to another building to see my psychiatrist for the first time, I was walking down the hallway and I was pretty much convinced that I was going to be molested. I didn't know if the person that was leading me down the hallway was going to do it or if my psychiatrist was going to do it. But I had that in the back of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I had already been trained that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Sure.
So when I was led into my psychiatrist's office, there was no windows. And I saw the documents, the certificates, and the degrees on the walls in his very regal office.
Mm-hmm.
And right away, I felt he's so much more important than me. And he's believable, more believable than me. And I don't want to be a bad girl. I'm going to do what I'm told, whatever. I don't know what to expect. Nobody told me what to expect.
Yeah.
Back then, they would inject the patient's arms with some kind of a drug. The girls in the adolescent unit at the mental institution called it a truth serum. I don't know the name of that drug, but
Yeah.
that's what he did. I rolled up my sleeve and he put some kind of a drug in my veins. And, he looked at me like this. I thought he was bending over to kiss me and to start the sexual act.
Oh, uh-huh.
Only 13.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I look back, I know he was looking in my eyes to see if the drug took effect yet.
Okay.
But nobody told me what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that if somebody would have instructed me before I went in that room
Mm-hmm.
to expect from him, in front of him,
Mm-hmm.
all three of us would be on the same page, and that there was somebody outside of that room that knows what's going on in that room and what's to be, expected from that visit.
Sure.
I think, I reached for his zipper when he did that.
Okay.
I thought he was initiating the sex act. So I was, I reached for his zipper and he looked at me very confused.
No.
He was a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't really quite understand,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The patient and the professional, either one of them could make a sexual advance.
Sure.
If there's not a third party out there that knows you're in there, what it's about, maybe put a sign on the door of who's in there when they went in. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think that could help protect both of them.
I agree. Yeah, and we've definitely have seen or experienced in our own lives or people that we know who've been accused of sexual impropriety incorrectly.
Yes.
But yeah,
Yes.
and I think like I had a physical a couple weeks ago, and the male, it was a male nurse, and he was doing all the stuff, and we were talking, and then he brought another woman in there, and I told him, I'm so thankful you're doing that to protect
Yes.
you. Because he was really trusting, and we had a great rapport. We're just chatting, having a good time. And, I think you have to, as not only the practitioner and the patient, but as an entire entity, these facilities
Yes.
need to protect themselves.
Exactly.
And, you know, we go into everything, protect the CYA thing, to cover your booty, just from a
Yeah.
legal point of view. But this is even more important. This is from helping someone therapeutically work
Right.
through something. So if they feel that they are going to be really heard, and they feel that this is a therapeutic environment versus a complete unknown, you're going to break through
Yep.
some of those barriers faster as well. Like, I think
Exactly.
overall, yeah, so that's a really good point to bring up.
Isn't that why we've got webcams on the police officers?
Absolutely. Yes, that's to protect them. And it also can help protect victims, but
Yeah.
it's predominantly to protect the officers, as it
Right.
should be. I mean,
Right. I don't think any one-on-one should be, well, of course, if it's going to be a physical exam room, you don't want to have the windows wide open and all that kind of stuff. But when I was with my counselor, there was no windows. You know,
the reason there shouldn't be. Like, why shouldn't
right.
right?
It was just a perfect setting for a predator to get away with it.
Yeah.
Just try not to make those such perfect settings for the predators to get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And they'll weed themselves out.
Because the victim can also make
Oh, sure.
a bad move like I did.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, that's, again, just coming to the table and understanding we've got hurt people in the situation.
Yes.
And, but we as a collective society need to protect people at their most vulnerable better.
Right.
It is not the first time I've heard about drug centers having those issues. There have been prostitution rings, trafficking rings brought out. There's horrible people in elder homes. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and that's just not okay. And
whenever you get a population of the vulnerable gathered in one spot, where are the predators going to go?
I'll tell you, if I was a predator, I'm sure I'd be.
Right.
I mean, that's exactly it. And I tell people we have this area in a neighborhood that's really super secure. Everyone thinks it's like Mayberry. And I tell them, you know, folks, if I was a criminal, I would be coming to your neighborhood, because you're just sitting ducks. It's the perfect trifecta for a criminal. And that's exactly right with these facilities and daycare centers, whatever it may be. Now, that does not, I don't want people to hear like you've got to be hyper vigilant and everybody's out to get you, because that's not it.
We don't want to create that kind of an attitude. It's just a prevention to protect everybody.
Absolutely. And build it into the process.
Right.
Why can't we do that? And I know that there's privacy in those things, yes, for sure. But to just be viewing two people sitting there having a conversation, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
You know, I would feel better knowing that I would be in a safer environment if I didn't know this person. And
exactly.
You know, you and I know that sometimes we're victimized by people we do know. Stranger danger is not the only bad guy out there. But I think that's a profound point. And I'm very sorry that you experienced that. And I'm so thankful that you got to the point, though, where you reached deep and you said, you know what, no more. I'm not going to let this happen anymore.
Right.
And you probably helped the next girl by doing that as well, right? I mean, you paid that forward, and
it's a domino. I'm not a domino, but it's a ripple effect.
It is definitely. And unfortunately, people don't really pay attention to much until their pocketbook is affected. So
I know
is what we need to do. Yeah,
and
it needs to affect that way.
Yeah.
So is there anything, and I know we'll have many more conversations because I think we're pretty bonded by now.
I do too.
We've had some good conversations.
Yeah.
And I like being able to talk about real stuff. You know, I can talk about the weather when I have to.
Right.
I'd really rather just really get down to relating to somebody, and who knows what will come from this. You know, you may have brought something up that helps someone start to go down their healing path. So how would you like to just wrap up this conversation? We'll have many more, I'm sure, but how would you like to leave this today for people?
Well, for victims, I want them to know it's so possible to reach the other side. It's hard work. It's not easy putting your trauma or your life in story form, but it's possible. It's not easy to go back to your darkest moments, but it's so worth it if you have the right person to disclose it to. So my advice is seek that person out, and it's going to take time. but you're worth that kind of time
Mm.
looking. They are out there.
I love that. I love that. And how about the people that are in that, excuse me, in that victim's life, their family or their friends, their coworkers? How can someone be a more compassionate person for them? Like, what would be something you would say to that person?
Continue to always look beneath the surface and understand that drug abuse and alcoholism is an indication of some kind of pain.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to get down to.
Mm-hmm.
Their pain should be our concern.
Okay.
It is very difficult to engage with alcoholics and drug addicts. My family can attest to that. I put them through hell.
Yeah.
Finally did have to let me go to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You are number one. You do have to protect yourself. So my advice is, can I tell you a quick story?
Yes, please. Yes.
I walked into my mother's house one time. I was a drug addict. I think I was in my late 20s. I needed some kind of respite from the street. And my brother was there. I never really got really warm welcomes when my siblings were there because they wanted me to stay away from mom.
Sure.
But he was there fixing the roof. Well, I went in like nothing, and helped myself to the refrigerator and used the bathroom. And I came out of the bathroom. And my mother and my brother were approaching me with their arms open.
Oh.
And it felt so weird.
Wow.
We got closer and closer, and they both put their arms around me and hugged me really tight. And I wanted to push them away, but
Yeah.
my brother, they hugged me really tight, and my brother started praying. And he said, "Dear Lord, be with my sister as she goes from here. Guide her and protect her and give her the strength that she needs." And then they broke free from the hug and said, "Ruth, you have to go now, and you can't come back."
Wow.
Looking back at that, Dr. Graber, I mean, I didn't understand it. I walked away and I thought, wow, I can't come back.
Yeah.
You have to understand, I was stealing from them.
Mm-hmm.
I had drama after drama, emergency after emergency. And then they would get these calls from the jails and the hospitals begging them to help me out. They couldn't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
When I look back at that, what they did was they were loving me and setting boundaries at the same time,
Yes.
which is the hardest thing in the world for people to do.
Yes.
But they did that. My actions did not show that I appreciated it back then, but looking back, it did leave a huge impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think that they were setting a boundary, not because they hated me, but because it was hard for them to do, but they were loving me at the same time.
Yes.
So if you can think of ways to love and set boundaries at the same time with a drug addict, you're protecting yourself and you're loving them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
And
leaving an impact.
that's really great, great insight, because I think that is one of the toughest parts about having an alcoholic or an addict
Yes.
in
You
your
just
life.
have to understand that your job is to plant huge seeds.
Yeah.
Your words might not perform miracles, and the heavens aren't going to fall down to the earth or anything. You just have to continue to plant seeds and feel good at doing your part.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you, Ruth. You're an inspiration, and I can't wait to have our next conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Graber. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Well, hold on just a moment with me. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. There will be some resources for you below. This is just the beginning of conversations we're going to be having with people. It's just talking with people. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.